stated, I will be joined by Councilman Visar any minute now. It's Tuesday, June 9th. Welcome to the Board of Public Works Edit Mobile Hearing Room. First, I want to thank you for your patience at many different levels, but especially today, given how long council did last. And I'm expecting Councilman Visar to be here. There are several items that are on the agenda, and I thought I would go through the process of letting those that are here on different items, which are on consent and which ones are being continued, in hopes that by the time I finish doing that, I'll get a second from Councilman Visar when he gets here, so those of you who are waiting on those specific items don't have to wait any longer. As you can see, we have some items that have many public comment cards, requests, so we're going to try to plow through those as well. But that being said, I'd just like to go through the agenda and let you know which ones have been continued, and hopefully give those persons an opportunity to leave when they would like, knowing that they will be continued. Number one, first of all, will be received and filed in as much as the appointee has requested withdrawal from further consideration. So they will not be joining us. I do have cards on item number 2. Item 3, they will be continuing to June 16. Now, there's several folks here that have submitted cards on item 3. So making you aware that we will continue that item until June 16th. That's item number 3. Number 4 is called special. Number 5 has been continued in this committee until June 16th as well. That's item number 5. And that will be for June 16th. Number 6, we have some cards here. It is presented in the consent calendar. So item 6, if you don't feel compelled to speak, you'd be very wise, since it's already in the consent. So, Mr. Sutton? Okay. A wise man, Mr. Sutton. Thank you, sir. So that's on consent. Item number 7 will be continued to July 7th. There are no cards on item 8, but we do need to make a technical change. One sentence. You want to come on up and give us that one?
Hi, I'm Theresa Marcus with the Planning Department. We just want a technical clarification that yes, the sidewalk easement will be required for future development. It will provide a 3-foot average sidewalk easement, and that's a minimum 2-foot and a maximum 2-foot easement. And we want to submit that we did give the city clerk the correction.
That's sidewalk, okay?
Okay.
All right, that's number 8. That would be on the consent with the added technical changes. Okay, 9 is special, 10 is special. 11 will be continued to June 30th. And hopefully in council on July 14th, that's item number 11, continued to June 30th. Item 12, again, there are several cards, item 12. That also will be continued to June 23rd and the council July 7th. That's item number 12, and I know there's several folks here on that item. So we want to make sure you're aware that that item has been continued to June 23rd in PERM and in council in July 7th. So council, we say with your approval, we can move on the consent items. Consent items have been moved, Roberto?
Yes, Councilman, I believe you said that would be
Item 6,
and also
8,
8 with technical changes.
yes. So I'm hoping those that are here for continued items are aware of it. So you don't have to wait any longer for that item because they have been moved to another date for this committee. And one has been received and filed in as much as the party has requested withdrawal for further consideration. Okay. So, Roberto, I think we're on number 2.
Sure, do you want to go in order, or do you want to do the appeal on item 4 and then take all the medical marijuana issues?
Let's do item 2 because we do have a council member here, Councilman Zine,
Okay.
who has joined us, and out of courtesy to him, many has other legislative commitments.
Item 2, Councilman, is a draft city attorney prepare ordinance relative to the medical marijuana issue.
Good afternoon, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Weezer, this is a statement to this committee regarding medicinal marijuana. I'd like to express my appreciation for the efforts that you, Councilmember Reyes, Councilmember Weezer, Councilmember Garcetti, and Councilmember Hahn, and the CLA and various city departments have put together the initial outline of what is being presented today in the Plum Committee, and I want to also add the medicinal marijuana collectives that have worked with us in the city of Los Angeles. Represents the best hope of bringing a conclusion to the long journey of adopting a sensible, permanent ordinance to regulate medicinal marijuana in the city of Los Angeles. By using existing legislation in other jurisdictions as an example, we can attempt to implement a plan to provide for the safe and affordable distribution of marijuana to qualified patients as expressed in voter-approved Proposition 215. It is vital that we do this while also protecting the surrounding communities from potential negative impacts. The proposal before you today begins the public discussion to establish reasonable location, planning, and zoning standards. Also addresses appropriate operational standards such as signage, ventilation, hours of operation, and security. As acknowledged by the California Attorney General, appropriate business license, sales tax, and seller's permits must be obtained to properly organize and operate a collective or cooperative in the manner of a storefront. And they must do so in compliance with the nonprofit requirements contained in Proposition 215. Los Angeles is at a crossroads to implement a Compassionate Use Act. This council, this committee, must make a policy decision to either accept the overly narrow, restrictive interpretation presented in the original city attorney's ordinance, which was previously considered by this committee, but was not moved forward to the council, or embark on a path using the Attorney General guidelines and the Medical Marijuana Program Act by the state legislature to craft a permanent ordinance before the city's interim control ordinance expires in September. I firmly believe that the Los Angeles city family, working together, can accomplish what so many other cities, such as Berkeley, Laguna Beach, Oakland, Palm Springs, San Francisco, Santa Rosa, West Hollywood, and Los Angeles County have been able to do. Adopt sensible, enforceable regulations to protect access to medical marijuana for qualified patients that prevent diversion for criminal use and protecting our neighborhoods, and working together, as we've been doing, with the focus of permitting medicinal marijuana for individuals that have a legitimate doctor's prescription, we will better serve the people of Los Angeles as well as protecting the communities we are elected to serve. So that is my statement, and any questions? If not, I will venture off to my next committee.
Thank you, Councilman Zine, for your advocacy, your energy, and your tenacity. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zine, for your leadership on this issue, and I know this is the beginning of discussion to get the right ordinance in place, and I think yesterday when you and I visited one of the dispensaries, we were relatively pleased with the professionalism that was shown, and I think that was a good model of what we want to pursue. So I certainly appreciate you taking the time to going out to my district to see what we've been encountering out there, and I appreciate your hard work on this item.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilman. We have another council representative, Jennifer Rivera, for Councilmember Janice Hahn.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Jennifer Rivera for Councilmember Janice Hahn, and I just wanted to say a few things that we have been working with Councilmember Reyes and other offices to try and bring some type of guidelines for today's committee discussion. Having said that, Ms. Hahn does have some very specific concerns that we wanted to bring to your attention, one of them being sensitive use definition and the 1,000-foot buffer that is in the ordinance that you will be discussing today. We feel that if medical marijuana dispensaries are looked at as a medical need, that 1,000 feet is too restrictive, and they should be considered as any other pharmaceutical store should be treated as such. Also, we want to make sure that the 187 dispensaries that are registered and were registered before the ICO are given top priority to comply and to become legal per the new ordinance. And with that, good luck, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Hahn, for your time. Thank you so much. Councilmember and the folks here in the audience, this committee considered on January 27th a draft ordinance from the city attorney, and at that time there was much discussion as to how it could be implemented and how it would impact existing facilities. We heard a lot of concern from the advocates and concerns from departments. And since then, we've been trying to figure out the best approach where we can be in a place to enforce the law while trying to maintain a posture where accessibility can be achieved for those who are truly in medical need. And so, with much research, engaging various entities, I had the opportunity to visit a facility, I believe it was on Robertson Boulevard in the west side, and got to see what could transpire when there are proper checks and balances in how a facility can conduct itself without impacting neighbors and causing a negative experience for the children and families, while making sure it maintains accessibility to those who are in need. That has been the challenge, and it's been even more difficult, as has been stated before. We have a federal law who takes one position, we have a state law who has another position. We're learning from the county and the district attorney's office how they're evolving as a jurisdiction in dealing with this challenge. The directives today really takes us into a different direction from what we had heard before, based on the knowledge and based on the research that we had accumulated since then. And it's a direction that will, at the outset, will be led by the Chief Legislative Analyst Office in coordination with the City Attorney's Office, Planning Department, Building and Safety, Department of Finance, I'm going to bring in also the policing element through the police commission into the discussion so that we can put forth the type of language that allows us to leverage the strengths of the city while trying to minimize its complexity as we process the whole dynamic of making sure it's accessible while controlling its impact. With that, and this will be a formal motion coming from myself as chair of this committee, that I would move to submit, present, and discuss the attached new direction draft ordinance, which is a product of the collaborative efforts of the 4 council offices, my office, Councilman Zines, Councilman Garcetti's, Councilman Hahn, as well as Councilman Mesa, in consultation with various city departments. So that's going to be the direction that we're going to be taking. And so we've heard from the 2 council offices that have been involved in this. And I believe we might have the council member representative from District 13 here to also make a statement. Are they here today? District 13, with Rita, is she here? District 13, are they going to be presenting? If they're here. Okay, I don't see them, so I'm assuming they will be. So I'd like to ask Mr. Dowd to begin the presentation and just giving us a thumbnail sketch of what is entailed in this new direction draft ordinance. And again, this is a sketch. There's much more that needs to be filled in, and that will occur as we wait for the new city attorney-elect to take office. But in the meantime, we're going to continue to proceed and work as diligently as possible. Mr. Dow.
Yes. Good afternoon, council members. Han Dow from the Office of the Chief Legislative Analyst. I've had an opportunity to review the 2 documents that were being presented and introduced by your committee today, and I'm able to provide a general overview of the key elements of those documents. It should be stated at the outset that the 2 documents are a working draft and would definitely require further instructions from this committee to various offices to implement, such as
Mr. Dow, you can speak into the microphone, they'll hear you a lot better.
Such as the Department of Building and Safety, Planning, and the City Attorney's Office. Various instructions would need to be made to be able to implement and make technical corrections to implement that. However, it should be noted that the document, as prepared and introduced, is of sufficient detail and depth that it should, if approved by this committee or recommended by this committee, should provide enough detail where a sufficient step would be created that a regulatory scheme for so-called medical marijuana dispensaries could be established within the city of LA, and regulatory fees there too. As an example of how the types of details and the depth of the proposed ordinance that's being proposed by the 4 offices here, the first document is an ordinance that creates an additional article within Chapter 4 of the Los Angeles Municipal Code under the public welfare provisions of that. And it proposed a permitting scheme similar and mirroring that of a tobacco retailer's permit. The proposal proposes that versus such other mechanisms within the city of LA, such as a regulatory scheme under Chapter 10, which could be business regulations or police permits that are issued under that chapter for establishments such as escort services, massage parlors, card clubs, etc. So even though it is a working draft document, it does provide this committee with very detailed directions that it could give to the various departments that would be very concrete. Just as a brief context and background that this committee may already know, November 5th, 1996, California voters approved the Compassionate Use Act, the CUA. which exempted seriously ill patients and their primary caregivers from state criminal liability for the possession and cultivation of marijuana. Subsequently, the California legislature in 2003 passed the Medical Marijuana Program Act of 2003, which supplemented and clarified the scope of the CUA, promoted uniform and consistent application of the CUA within the state, and enhanced access for patients and caregivers to medical marijuana. Within the Medical Marijuana Program Act, Section 11362.81D of the Health and Safety Codes provides for the State Attorney General to create guidelines for the security and to help promote and give guidelines for the security and diversion of marijuana within that act. Section 11362.83 of the Health and Safety Code of that Medical Marijuana Act allows cities such as the City of LA to create, to adopt and enforce local laws that are consistent with the Medical Marijuana Program Act. Consistent with those provisions, the four council offices collaboratively have developed this program scheme that I can provide a general overview of the key elements. There's 11 key elements that I think should be highlighted within the proposal, which again mirrors the process that the city already has for the issuance of tobacco retailer's permit. The first key element is it establishes a medical marijuana dispensary definition. A review of it is that it is a very broad definition that covers definitions within Health and Safety Code 11362.775, which deals with collectives and cooperatives within the state. It addresses the Attorney General guidelines for capital A, which deals with business forms for collectives and cooperatives. And it also associates and addresses, I guess incorporates, the definition of medical marijuana dispensaries that were issued within our own ICO, the Los Angeles County, and other cities such as Oakland. The purpose of the broad definition, obviously, is to try to cover all types of establishments, no matter what form that they're taking within the city of LA, whether they call themselves collectives, dispensaries, cooperatives, but to create a definition that would capture all that and place it within this regulatory scheme that's being proposed. The second key element that should be highlighted within this ordinance is that it presents a definition for sensitive uses. Sensitive uses defined as schools, public parks, libraries, public beach access points, child-oriented establishments, and establishments that are advertised in a manner that caters towards minors. And the purpose of the sensitive use definition is basically so that the city can create some location criterias where it would like these so-called dispensaries to be able to be located. A third element of this ordinance is the application procedures that it proposes, which again is similar to the tobacco retailer's permit that is administered by the Office of Finance. Key provisions within there that distinguish it obviously from the tobacco permits is that there will be two permits that would be required, one for the establishment itself and another one for the permittees that would operate it. So two separate permits, one for the establishment. The application itself would have to be signed by at least two of the qualified patients within the dispensaries. Information that's within these applications are to remain confidential, and that's pursuant in addressing Health and Safety Code 11362.81B4, which requires that the ID card program within the state, that the records pursuant to those remain confidential. Again, the application procedure would be administered by the Office of Finance, and it would mirror and hopefully fit into what the Office of Finance already does with its tobacco permits, which is, I believe right now, they issue a single-page, pretty expedited process where the discretion is not within the Office of Finance, but approvals need to be made within several offices before they an applicant submits a permit with the Office of Finance, approvals from Building and Safety, the Police Department, etc. And they would go through that process by coming with an application that includes a valid building permit, certified occupancy, and stamped approval and site plans. The application would also require, and these are the key elements of this ordinance, the application would also require a security plan that would be approved by the Los Angeles Police Department, and there's various key provisions within the ordinance. In particular, one is that there's a security guard that's always on duty during the operation of the dispensary. With regards to actual issuance of the permit, the actual issuance of the permit would be allowable if certain criteria are met, criteria within the Planning and Zoning Code, which the second document that's being presented recommends specific changes to the Planning and Zoning Code that would limit, obviously, the locations and other building requirements for these dispensaries. It would also require and address the tax liability for these dispensaries, which is consistent with the State Attorney General Guidelines 1D and Section 4B2, which indicated that a seller's permit is required with the State Board of Equalization. There's operational requirements that are specifically mandated within the proposed ordinance. Some key provisions that should be highlighted: it mandates certain operating hours. The proposal, as currently written, is between 9 a.m. and 8 p.m. It requires dispensary staff that works at these dispensaries to have background checks, transactions to be recorded, no ATMs within the premises, that the dispensary also submit and maintain a tax-exempt status by submittal of an exemption application with the Office of Finance, so that there's enough or sufficient documentation so that we can see that it's a not-for-profit type of status. It requires limitations as to how much marijuana these dispensaries can hold, and it's not a numerical limitation, but a limitation that the marijuana that's being held at these facilities are what an amount reasonable for its immediate needs, so that there isn't an excessive amount. The names of the registered members of these collectives who will be contributing marijuana will be given to the Los Angeles Police Department. Security recordings will be maintained, and litter removal. Those are some of the operational requirements that would have to be continually kept for the dispensaries. A fifth key element is that it creates fees, or it requires fees for the permit, and it would require directions from this committee to direct the CAO to go through some sort of fee study to establish the appropriate fees. Another key provision is that it requires maintenance of records by these dispensaries, so that there is a tracking records, including of the owners, the lessees, the amount of compensation that's being given to primary caregivers. The details are within the document itself. The seventh key provision is that it creates an inspection authority and enforcement mechanisms that fall in line with basically what the city now does with the tobacco retailer's permit. It also creates administrative violations and penalties that, again, are consistent with what the city now does with tobacco retailer's permit, where the enforcement provisions are enforced within the city attorney's office. They have a tobacco enforcement unit under their criminal division, and it would be enforced consistent with that. The penalties include suspension and revocations, and those are detailed. A ninth key provision is that it creates an administrative review procedures for when these permits are revoked, and the review procedures would be consistent with what is in LA Municipal Code 102.13.01, which is reviewed by the police permit panel. Lastly, well, second to last, it has the indemnification procedures, which is consistent with most other city ordinances on this, so that, again, it is a reiteration that although we are creating a permit for this, we are not sanctioning or creating any sort of protections for these establishments from prosecution from state or federal laws. And lastly, there's a provision that allows a 1-year time period for the existing dispensaries, so-called dispensaries that have registered within the ICO, to come within compliance of these new provisions. Quickly going over the second document, there's probably 5 key elements within it that should be highlighted to the committee. The details, the first is that...
You already teased us when you said second to the last. When you go to 5 more, okay, let's go.
Document. These are 5 quick elements that are detailed within the second document. The first is that it creates, or it provides for directions on permitted zoning districts, and these are really directions to planning and building and safety to create, to draft specific language for an ordinance that addresses these issues. The issue with zoning districts that would be allowed here, location standards such as what was mentioned by the representative from Councilmember Hahn on terms of how far these things should be from sensitive uses, site building standards such as lobby areas, dispensing areas that they should have, cultivation areas, etc., whether on-site consumption could be allowed within these provisions. And it creates parking requirements similar to that of a retail use. And lastly, it indicates that there should be no variance or deviations from those planning and zoning codes. I think those are the 2 documents that were prepared by the collaborative efforts of the 4 council offices.
Well, there's a lot of detail there, and it reflects a lot of work. There's still, I believe there's still a lot more to do, and hopefully we'll get to a place sooner than later so that we can have this ordinance before us in council. And ideally, we can shoot for the next couple of months. That would be great. That being said, any questions from Mr. Down, Councilmember?
Yes, just I got to see this ordinance this morning, and, there is a lot of discussion that needs to happen, as, other people just seen it for the first time. I know we have a task force, but I think there's a lot of other folks who could give some input on how we should move forward. Well, one of my questions is the framework that we're setting up is one of a permitting process as opposed to, let's say, alcohol right now, which is a CUP. I'm not for one or the other right now. I just want to ask the question, why the permitting process, why that approach and not a CUP process, conditional use permit?
This is actually a hybrid of both. It incorporates both, because I think if you're going to go through a CUP process or a land use, and you can get specific advice from the city attorneys as well, is that it doesn't allow you to touch upon a lot of the operational requirements that we would want to regulate for the city. And so it's a hybrid that requires, obviously, the second document requests that planning come up with a draft ordinance that could be prepared that deals with the land use element of it, that similar to a CUP, but also the licensing portion of it deals with the operational requirements, and so it covers both.
I see. And is this a new approach that local cities are taking, or is this done by any other city?
It is being proposed by the city of Laguna Beach right now. Is city of Laguna Beach is also going down this path. The city of Oakland uses more of a permitting process and less of a land use, but that's because it provides that its city manager have a lot of discretion in terms of how it's going to issue these permits. And so it doesn't necessarily go down the land use side, but allows a permitted side. But within their permitting process, it's the city manager, almost the equivalent of a mayor, that would be able to have these discretion, and it creates also a numerical cap of 4. And so we've created a hybrid, or the council offices have created or proposed a hybrid that deals with some of the discretion on the operational requirements, and also a very finite land use requirements.
And speaking of Oakland, you know, you mentioned they have 4. Should we, and I'm not proposing this, I just want to put the question out there, should we do a cap, or put a cap on the number of dispensaries, or does that address this at all?
Right now, they're going through the process of whether they will update their cap, because they've indicated that the cap they're hitting that cap. And also consider that their dispensaries have thousands of members within it. And so you can put a numerical cap, but then you would also, if you really want to go down that path, need a cap on the amount of members that are in there, because you're going to have 4 dispensaries, but they're going to be giant dispensaries as opposed to smaller dispensaries that have smaller memberships in different locations.
So you, as someone who spent some time on this for some time, you would advise against putting a cap on the ordinance?
It would be definitely a policy decision, but you have to address the fact that you can put a cap, but right now Oakland is addressing increasing their caps, and they're having hearings on that. But also their dispensaries are much larger than what I think is anticipated with the amount of dispensaries that we would be regulating here, the size of those dispensaries.
Okay, and finally, today in council, I raised the issue that we have within our own jurisdiction and powers and responsibilities certain tools at our disposal to regulate these dispensaries. One area that we don't have is the medical profession that gives out the prescriptions. From my experience in just the last few weeks that I've been involved in this matter, I find, and I keep hearing, that a lot of doctors, not all of them, but there are many out there, who give out these prescriptions quite freely for a fee. Is there anything in here that would help us regulate that, and can we regulate that part of this framework?
That is outside of our jurisdiction on that. And from what I've read and researched is that the medical boards are addressing this issue because of that exact complaint. They technically can't prescribe medical marijuana, but they can certainly recommend. And what the medical boards from various states have adopted is that they have indicated to their physicians under their control is that although you cannot prescribe medical marijuana as a prescription, because that specifically is dictated by them, we are requiring you to, quote unquote, make recommendations under the same standards that you would use for prescribing allowed medications. And that's how a lot of the medical boards are addressing that issue, so that they can enforce within their own members.
Okay. And one of the dispensaries I went to yesterday didn't have any signage outside. What does this ordinance say about signage?
It's going to create, some of that is going to be commented by building safety and planning in terms of what the appropriate signage should be. And right now there's a couple of signs that are proposed currently here. One would be the notices and rules for the members, so that they are reminded how they are supposed to operate within these things. And then secondly, exterior signage, but I think it's very minimal exterior signage, so that, one, it's consistent with whatever the building codes or the signage areas are around there, but I think it's almost more restrictive as well, so that it doesn't stand out.
So there'll be some signage, but it will follow building and safety standards?
Exactly.
In what they provide? Okay. You know, I'm happy to see that we are providing some provisions on locating these facilities near sensitive uses, such as churches, schools, etc. But you know, if done right, we shouldn't have to be worried about where they're locating, because I think we won't have the problems that we've seen with some fly-by-night dispensaries. So I think it's helpful as we start, and I think we have to do that now, but eventually I think if we get to a point where we are regulating these and everything is running smoothly, I don't think that should probably be an issue. And I just want to end my comments today by saying, you know, there's been a lot of cities who actually haven't allowed any of these dispensaries at all. But I think the city of Los Angeles has taken the approach that the majority of the council members do support the intent of Proposition 215 and allowing those who need it for medicinal purposes to have access to it. What we're grappling with is how to do that. And so I know I've heard in public comment today some individuals who really had some really heart-wrenching stories about why they need access. And believe me, we need to provide it to those who need it. But right now, we have a system in the city where it is practically unregulated, and those few individuals who are taking advantage of the system for profit are putting in danger those who really need to have access. So we want to go down a path to allow access. We're just trying to grapple with how best to do it in a way that doesn't jeopardize it for those people who really truly need it.
Thank you, Councilman Robertson, on your diligence on the matter regarding the clause as well. As Mr. Daly, we have a very rough draft. We're going to proceed to policies and bring together the different departments. Hopefully, we have the planning and the police commission's role as well. So that's something that we look forward to working with you as the new city attorney comes into office. So again, thank you for your hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Daly. Next, I'd like to call up the planning department for their verbal report. And as Mr. Bell comes up, part of the challenge we had is that we did start down a land use ordinance pathway, then it veered towards a more of a health code issue, which changed the focus, and now we're back seeing how we can combine the two so we can have an implementation of an effective, enforceable ordinance. So Mr. Bell, it's all yours.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. Alan Bell, Planning Department staff. We are very pleased to be able to be working with the Chief Legislative Analyst and the other city agencies on this very important issue, and we do stand ready to assist this committee in crafting a viable regulation that will carry out the goals of the Compassionate Use Act. From our perspective, there are land use issues related to the regulation of medical marijuana, and it would be appropriate for the Planning Department to provide recommendations to the City Planning Commission on how best to regulate this. Specifically, I think any kind of a land use ordinance must identify the zones in which these facilities would be allowed, distance requirements, both perhaps distance from each other and distance from sensitive land uses. It would be appropriate to include within such a land use ordinance operating standards, as well as permitting and enforcement regulations. So I think that the Planning Department and the Planning Commission can weigh in on the land use component of this. We look forward to working on an expedited schedule. We will also be able to provide land use analysis using our geographic information system to do the mapping of these particular sites and their distance from those requirements, and that will provide important information for this committee in deliberating the best policy alternatives. So we're very happy to be working on this particular issue, and we will be looking forward to working with the different city agencies.
One variable that struck me as one of the speakers in the council chamber brought up is that we do have a number of patients who are in need of this medical attention in different areas of health. Is that a variable that we could put into the formula when we start talking about quantity and numbers of establishments and the equation in terms of how relevant it is to the medical need, as opposed to those who are trying to game the system to use it just for a quick profit and abuse the communities that they've established themselves in? I wanted to put that out there just as one of the variables, because I think that is a very legitimate perspective, and if that gets worked in or if there is a role for that, I just wanted to put that out there for you.
I think that is an appropriate policy variable. I mean, one is where these sites should be located away from. Another consideration may be where these sites should be located near. Location near, for example, it may be appropriate for medical facilities. The patients who have occasion to visit these facilities, it may be appropriate to site them near those, for example, and we would be able to, through our GIS analysis, provide that type of data for the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Any questions? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bell, for your presentation. Now we move into the public hearing portion of this process, and I'd like to keep it to 1 minute. We have a hefty set of cards here. We still have a few more items on the agenda, and I know we've taken some time to get here, given the length of the city council. So that being said, I'd like to call up the first few speakers. We have Amy Robertson, Barry Kramer, and Michael, I believe it's Bax. Please come on up, and welcome to City Hall.
I'm Amy Robertson, and I'm an Eagle Rock resident, an architect, and a patient. And I, first of all, would like to thank Councilman Huizar and Reyes for their leadership on this issue. And secondly, I have 2 points. One being that as a patient, I hope that the Plum Committee is going to make sure that I still have access to cannabis edibles. Many patients, including myself, are unable to vaporize or smoke their medicine, and therefore it's very important that we have a method of ingestion, that being an edible. Secondly, I think it's very important that that we take advantage of the advent of lab testing to ensure that these edibles are safe, consistent, and clean, and those edibles can then deserve a place in those regulations. And my second point being that I believe it's important that patient cultivars are not required to identify themselves, because they're allowed to do so under state law, and it would open them to incrimination under.
Thank you, Ms. Robertson. Thank you very much for taking the time. And just before I start, Mr. Kramer, there are copies of the draft in the blue in the back area there. Yes.
There are copies of the draft. They are in the back
about
of
the
the room.
clerk, or what is it?
They are in the back of the room. Copies of the draft ordinance. That's about 40, 50 copies in the back.
Okay. Mr. Kramer.
Thanks for listening to me today. My name is Barry Kramer. I'm a resident of the city of Los Angeles. I'm a medical marijuana patient, and I'm the operator of one of the 187 registered medical cannabis dispensing collectives here in Los Angeles. I'm a member of GLACA, the Greater Los Angeles Collectives Alliance, and I was one of the first dispensing collectives back in 2007 to be accredited by that organization. I'm here today to ask you for swift and thoughtful action to bring about fair regulations for medical marijuana here in Los Angeles. Please don't forget why you voted for the moratorium in the first place. It was to allow the valid medical marijuana patients in this city of Los Angeles to be able to have safe access to their medicine, so that your constituents who use medical marijuana to improve the quality of their lives and ease their suffering don't have to buy from illicit dealers on the streets. You acknowledge the need for medical marijuana patients to be able to have a safe way to obtain their medicine, and now we need to have sensible regulations that offer that safe access to patients, and very importantly, respects the safety and quality of life in the communities that we operate in. And I just want to thank you for listening to me today.
Thank you, sir. We have Michael Bax, Leonard Schaefer, and S. Reis, R-E-I-S, or Rice. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'd just like to thank Councilman Member Huizar for his support on this issue. We've learned a lot. A lot of us who've been down to City Hall for the first time today. It was really helpful for us to hear what was going on in City Council and in here. I have 2 points to make. One about patient cultivators. I run a scientific-oriented collective. I want to find the best cultivators I can find who happen to be patients. Because we're going to be required to produce our own medicine, you want to make sure that the quality of that medicine is as high as it can be. Unfortunately, the people who can do that often hold Drug Enforcement Agency licenses, and they put those at risk by cultivating for our dispensary. So you have a catch-22 here. You want high-quality medicine provided to patients. You want it grown by those patients, but the patients with the best qualifications may put themselves professionally at risk by producing medicine. Obviously, you don't want amateurs producing medicine, so I hope that you'll take that under consideration.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for that. Good afternoon.
Right, good afternoon. Leonard Schaefer, Chair Tarzana Neighborhood Council, Chair of the Los Angeles Neighborhood Council Coalition. I'm very happy to see that we're having a two-pronged ordinance now. I can tell you that the neighborhood councils have been very concerned about the planning portion as opposed to the regulatory portion of this scheme. Also, the neighborhood councils are concerned about being included in this process. We would much rather be proactive than reactive. I would like to state that after reading the draft to which I was able to download, you might consider that with regards to regulatory, it may be too restrictive with regards to small groups of 2, 3, or 4 persons who wish to have a cooperative, because I can tell you from the business I'm in, which is security, setting up some of these establishments are going to be very, very expensive.
Thank you, sir. We have good afternoon. After we will have Paul Lerner, and we will have Andrew Lockman. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Apparently, the Los Angeles City
Council. Give us your name and address.
Oh, my name and address?
Yes.
Stephen Reese. I live in the Melrose area of Los Angeles.
Okay.
Apparently, the Los Angeles City Council is the only body that could have prevented the staggering proliferation of marijuana clinics, and apparently you're the only ones who can fix this. You have allowed these clinics to open without regulation of any kind. You have allowed them to open next door and across the street from churches and schools. A robbery and shootout at one of these clinics several months ago claimed the life of the clinic's employee. A robbery and shootout at a clinic in Koreatown a few months ago claimed no lives, but transpired at 10:30 a.m. on a school day across the street from an elementary school playground. It is not beyond the realm of possibility that a future robbery and shootout will claim the life of another clinic employee, an innocent bystander, or a child, or a police officer. Imagine how you're going to feel if this happens. Please do your job quickly so you won't have to find out. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we'll have Monica Harmon, I believe.
My name is Paul Lerner. I'm on the board of the Mid-City West Community Council and the co-chair of its Public Safety Committee. We're concerned about the dispensaries because of the crime connected to them. According to a new white paper from the California Police Chiefs Association, those crimes have included murder, armed robbery, drug dealing, sales to minors, loitering, heavy vehicle and foot traffic outside of dispensaries, increased noise, and robberies of customers just outside of dispensaries. We ask that there be a cap on the number of dispensaries in the city. We ask that there be no grandfathering of dispensaries that opened illegally during the moratorium, and we ask that neighborhood councils have input to what happens in their neighborhoods through a CUP process. The neighborhoods are very, very concerned about what is happening. These are the areas where we live and raise our families. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Andrew Lackman. I'm the chair of Mid-City West Community Council. First of all, I think this is a very good step. I do wish the neighborhood councils would have been included more in some of the initial planning. I think it is very good that you are working with the industry as well to create standards, but it also affects us, and we have a very similar perspective. I've spoken with many of the people here. Both groups favor some kind of reasonable regulation, and both sides should be included because there may be some impacts on the community that perhaps they're not aware of, just as there may be some impacts on their businesses that we in the community are not aware of. There were a couple suggestions I have because I have only seen the planning thing for the first time today. First of all, we talked about density. I think that's been covered. I also think perhaps that these locations should only be in certain commercial zoning areas and should not be in residential areas. I didn't see that necessarily covered. The current draft does not deal with people who are convicted of violent felonies. San Francisco does deal with that. And also with regards to consumption, use, and being near alcohol, I know we're out of time.
But there's no reason why you can't submit that in writing, so thank you very much.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Our next speaker is Monica Harmon, Don Duncan, and then Richard Kearns.
Good afternoon. Monica Harmon, Community Action Team of Boyle Heights. This is the only community that has to consistently come and speak on quality of life issues because Councilman Weezer just doesn't get it. You cannot have these, I totally support and understand the patients that need it, but when you have a community with 35 gang members, over 249 liquor licenses, one of them, which we waited here for 2 hours, but it's being continued, the entire community is against, but Councilman Weezer is the only one in the entire community that wants that liquor license. You know, we have to speak out. I was driving on Cesar Chavez Boulevard, one of these dispensaries popped up. LAPD didn't even know about it. I hope you are forthcoming and really regulate these, because you did a horrible job with the billboards. I mean, they're all over the place. There's loopholes with this. Please do your job and regulate these. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, for the record, there was an item today that has to do with a variance, and area planning commission actually approved what's with us before us today is a variance, and it's a mistruth to say that I was in support of it today. Thanks.
Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Don Duncan. I'm a resident of Los Angeles and the California Director for Americans for Safe Access. And I am here today to, first of all, I hope you guys had a chance to review the email I sent you that has much greater detail. If you haven't seen that, it's in your inbox. I want to say thank you for moving forward with the regulatory process. It's very important in Los Angeles. I think it's important that this committee has rejected the previous version of the ordinance, which regarded all of the patients' associations as illegal, despite what the state law says in Section 775 of Senate Bill 420. I do want to urge you, however, to continue to make improvements in this draft of the ordinance. There are provisions here that require collectives and cooperatives to disclose the names of all of their patient cultivators who supply the facility. Any legal member of a legal collective and cooperative can supply medicine, so it's not necessary, but it may also be dangerous to have this sort of information disclosed given the federal situation. So I urge you to revisit that and also to have a look at the other issues raised in the email that I've sent you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We have Richard Kearns, Lauren Green, and Michael Larson.
My name is Richard Kearns. I'm a person with AIDS, a long-term survivor, an AIDS activist. Thank you for your always thoughtful reception on this issue. I was talking with AIDS activists before. One of the preconditions of AIDS, one of the things that makes us more liable to AIDS is poverty. And it certainly is one of the outcomes of AIDS, as any chronic disease. We're building a community that serves people that have chronic diseases that are being driven to poverty. So compassionate access is an important part of that. I was at the 10th Mid-City stakeholders meeting last night, and they want to know how to tell the difference between good dispensaries and bad. Well, support the 187. Say give them a city sticker and say, yes, we are one of the legitimate dispensaries here, so that the neighbors can tell the difference and so that patients can tell the difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We have Lauren Green, Michael Larson, then we'll have Howard Enrique, and then Richard W. Eastman. Good afternoon, sir.
Yes, hi. My name is Lauren Green. I'm actually a resident of Glendale, but because Glendale doesn't have any dispensaries, I have to come to Los Angeles. I'm a realtor, a state-certified appraiser, and a concerned father. And as all the above, I would like to see regulations in place that provide safe access without over-regulation. We don't over-regulate alcohol, and so why should we with cannabis, which is far safer and good medicine for many of us. Collective locations that are discrete, 500 feet from sensitive locations, like what we have with adult entertainment, I think is plenty. The Attorney General's guidelines regarding tracking patients, transactions, and caregivers, etc., and growers is really overly stringent. I urge you to keep this simple so collectives can have the freedom to provide good medicine at reasonable prices. Americans for Safe Access has provided a paragon of excellent recommendations. I urge you to consider each and every one of them, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Next, please. Michael Larson, Howard Enrique, and then we have Richard Eastman.
Good afternoon. I'm Michael Larson from the Eagle Rock Neighborhood Council. We'd like to thank this committee, Mr. Reyes, Mr. Huizar, especially for their attention and work in this matter. We look forward to working with you and hopefully other neighborhood councils in transforming this draft into an effective final ordinance. I'd like to reiterate some important concerns that we have that we'd like to see addressed in the ordinance. One is that the MMDs be subject to a conditional use permit so that local communities can have ongoing input at public hearings. That a cap on the total number of MMDs is put at least on the table for discussion, and that in addition to administrative-based enforcement, that there be automatic and independent criminal and civil enforcement allowed by LAPD and LADBS, and that this be these enforcement measures be specifically spelled out in the ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I just want to make it very clear that we're closing the public hearing now because we keep getting cards and we could stay here all night. So we're going to close the public hearing cards as of now. Good afternoon, sir.
Richard Eastman, City of Residence, Hollywood, former HIV/AIDS Commissioner, County of Los Angeles, person living with AIDS since 1994, founder of the very first dispensary in the Los Angeles area in 1995. One of the people that have stood up, illness, I wish we could cap AIDS. The voters of California, when they passed this law and I opened that first dispensary, I have to go to Sacramento. They did, Arnold's trying to cut $80 million for my friends to live with AIDS for the medications. There's 16 million people in Los Angeles. Illness does not discriminate. How can we cap something, when you go to buy aspirin, can you only buy it at one store and not buy it at another store? This is a medicine for over 5,000 years. I met President Clinton. I'm going to be meeting President Obama. And if Los Angeles doesn't get off their butts and get this done, there was no rules or regulations when I opened that first dispensary. I want to thank you for all the years I've come before you as a person living with AIDS, and I'm about to get on a bus to go fight for $80 million for people living with AIDS.
Good luck to you.
Thank you
very much. Okay. We have Howard Enrique, Matthew Schulman, and then we have Yolanda Gonzalez. Howard Enrique, are you here? Matthew Schulman, Yolanda Gonzalez, Ray Chavez, and Stu Richland.
Hi, my name
Good afternoon.
Hello, my name is Howard Enrique. I'm just representing my collective. I actually wanted to say that instead of regulating the process, why don't we regulate the dispensaries themselves? There's about 20% of them that don't even have hardship applications that are already functioning. And there's a lot of businesses out there that don't even bother to get their seller's permit or their business licenses. These other dispensaries that have the hardship applications have truly wanted to go with the Compassionate Use Act by using compassion and actually not-for-profit purposes. A lot of these other dispensaries, on the other hand, have been getting into the industry because they think it's a lucrative industry and they would make a lot of money on it. If we can properly regulate the dispensaries themselves as to, I guess, taxing that per weight or whatever ordinances you can set forth, then you could probably use that money to even help the government that's ailing at the moment with, I don't know, just government organizations that would probably need it, like the LAPD. Because I remember about a week ago, you guys needed money to be able to give to the LAPD because you were going to do a hiring freeze.
You're right, we're at $500 million right now in the hole. It could be $1 billion by next year. So thank you, sir.
Sit and regulate it.
Thank you.
Yolanda Gonzalez, past Vice President for Boyle Heights and Venice. I'm surprised that this did not go through the neighborhood councils because we are part of your charter, A. B, why is it that when I have to get a prescription for a specific malady, I have to go through 3 doctors in order to get that prescription, and it has to be authorized by my general practitioner? 2, potheads are potheads. I grew up in the pothead generation. I myself inhaled it, but I'm glad I never got hooked onto it. I hated it. But you know something? I was, as a matter of fact, insulted when I walked out of your City Hall council meeting. Those are your potheads. The people that need them, I can understand why. There's a legitimate. But this should be regularized by 3 doctors. And it should be reported to the police department. God don't pay my bills, God don't pay my tragedies, and God don't pay my license insurance. Because that's a big liability on my property, around my property, and around me.
Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez. Matthew Schulman, Renee Chavez, and I believe it's Stuart Richland. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Council. I suffer from arthritis and anxiety that is normally prescribed by pharmaceutical needs, and this medication hurts my body and leaves me unable to participate in jobs and activities that make me an active citizen. I think the regulations should be set to ensure quality and safety for all patients for responsible citizens. This also includes keeping my medical prescriptions be kept confidential, just like any other doctor prescribed medication. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Next.
Good afternoon. My name is Renee Chavez, and I'm one of the folks waiting for item 2 that got continued for an hour and 40 minutes for you folks. But as relates to this particular case, there needs to be something else put in place as it relates to density of current alcohol licenses. CD14 in particular is plagued with a humongous amount of licenses, 297 to be exact, that are operating legally. So when you're putting this ordinance together, please make sure that you actually take into consideration the density of other licenses that currently exist, particularly alcohol. So also, the other challenge that I have as a resident, a property owner, and a mother of a 15-year-old child is what other kind of enforcement mechanisms can you put into place? Because y'all can't keep up with what's already on the books. LA Municipal Code is being violated, particularly on item 12 again, continued. Building and safety issues aren't being handled. Law enforcement can't keep up. The fire department can't get them to get their business straight. So if you guys can't keep up with what already exists on the books, what makes you think you can handle this?
Thank you very much. Stuart Richland, our last speaker.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your kind work and focus on this topic. I wanted to point out that some language has been used about the illegal centers versus the 187 legal. That's a language trick, because we know that on the April 28th motion that was brought and signed by some of the councilmen here, that the city attorney stated specifically that the city attorney could not take action on the hardships because they did file legal process. So let's clarify that the hardship people are not illegal, and furthermore, that out of the 187, the medical marijuana FAC, as I mentioned down in the other office, the medical marijuana FAC allows the resale of these centers even though they're a nonprofit corporation, which to me is a legal impossibility. Nonetheless, the 187, there are a lot of good people in there, and in the hardship group, there are a lot of people that are good there too. And as long as they are following the rules of the Attorney General's guidelines and not taking care of non-patients, and if they're non-profit, they should be allowed a fair hearing and not thrown out altogether. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Okay, that concludes the public hearing. Come on up. It may have got mixed up with one of the other items, but come on up. Good afternoon.
My name is Theresa Marcus. Thank you. And I'm from Boyle Heights. I was here for another agenda item, and I just have to tell you that I was very disappointed with our Councilman Weezer. He has our phone numbers personally. He knows exactly where I live. And it would have been really nice for someone to tell us that you were going to reschedule that agenda item. Most of us here, except for me, had to reschedule their jobs, had to take time off of their jobs, and just out of courtesy. And in regards to the marijuana issue, please, this is a state level issue. Why are we spending money on a land use zoning here? And the other thing is either have the pharmaceuticals take care of it or let them grow their own marijuana. My God.
Okay. Rebecca, hold on. We do have, those items are continued as of Friday morning, and so that we could avoid this predicament. But it is posted, and it's posted with 72 hours in advance notice. So it's on the agenda.
For your information, my name is Barbara Greaves. I'm the city clerk for the committee for the Planning and Land Use Management Committee. On Friday, the agenda was posted with the items continued with the future dates. The agenda is located in the back. We cannot refuse speaker cards. It would probably be nice if I had have told you when to submit your speaker card, but we were too busy taking cards at the outset of the meeting. Right.
And also, Ms. Marcus, you're sitting next to the person who appealed it, who's your friend, and you're always here with them. They get notice if these things are continued, so she knew.
We didn't get notice.
Okay, well, we apologize for the inconvenience. Yes, ma'am. Okay, we apologize for the inconvenience, but this closes public hearing. Thank you very much. Okay, your name is?
Duff, Reverend Patrick Duff.
Well, let's do it.
Okay.
What's the last one?
Well, I just want to make you aware of an actual hardship that I'm incurring myself from my landlord. I run a church. It's a Rastafarian temple where we also dispense the sacrament of our faith, which is cannabis, to the patients of California. I've been doing it for 5 years. Okay, the same way. My landlord has come to find out he had a meeting with a city commissioner and another dispensary operator right behind my house, or right in front of my house. I put my ear up to the wall and come to find out they're trying to force me out of my church and put in a medical marijuana dispensary for this guy to run. So the year and 4 months I spent there, hard work and building up the patient base, anything like that, is just going to be thrown out the window. That being said, I was arrested on the 4th of last week by LAPD, who we have on video, did not state a charge, refused to state a charge, and then when they did charged me with criminal threats. Now, there's going to be a lawsuit filed against the city on this because we do have it on videotape, and when you're being arrested, it is your right to know what you're being charged with. And I was not only detained, but I was beat by the police officers and my genitals pulled.
Thank you, sir. Okay. That does conclude public hearing. Councilmember?
Yes, two quick questions on this. Is there any type of quality control as to the type of, who should we ask, the city attorney or the planning person?
Let's have them both come up, Mr. Bell and Mr. Bell.
Two quick questions. One is there any type of quality control in this ordinance that allows us to control for the type of medicine that is being given out, for example, concentration of mold, other things like that have been brought to my attention? Is that an issue that we deal with in this ordinance? No?
If you're referring to regulating, for example, the way in which the marijuana is packaged, if it's in edibles or smokable, I mean, there are provisions within the ordinance that would address that. As far as testing the quality, if that is what your question is. For
example, some of it may be more potent than others, and so do we deal with that at all? Should we?
I don't know that the ordinance does that.
Okay.
Whether we should, and particularly how would we particularly enforce that, that's a difficult question because we would have to rely on city staff to, for example, do some type of laboratory testing. My first guess is that would probably be beyond the capacity or the authority of the city to regulate, for example, the content of the product itself.
It's beyond our authority to do so.
I would hazard a guess that it would be beyond our authority.
Yeah. I usually don't do this, and I don't want to begin a precedent, but I know the gentleman raising his hand there, I was speaking to you. Would you mind coming up, please? I was speaking to you yesterday about this very issue, and
I'm the potency monitor chair for the Medical Cannabis Safety Council here in California.
Okay.
One of the things that I'm the potency monitoring chair for the Medical Cannabis Safety Council, which is a trade organization in California to bring lab testing protocols into the medical cannabis community. We're very concerned about the safety, purity, and potency of the cannabis that's purveyed by dispensaries in California. We have a working laboratory in Oakland right now that we're going to be using to start testing for both cannabinoids and pathogenic molds. We're going to very quickly expand that into genetic fingerprinting of strains so that we know precisely what is being offered by these dispensaries. And this is on the fast track, and it's completely internally generated by the medical cannabis
Two questions. Have you seen other local jurisdictions do this type of testing?
It's a little bit ahead of the game.
That's ahead of the game.
I mean, the nice thing about it is LA can really take the lead on this, so I hope we do.
And secondly, real quick, what are the benefits of testing?
The benefits of testing are that when you're dealing with a raw herbal product like cannabis, you want to make certain that the microbial and mold levels on it are below a certain threshold. Other countries have actually taken the lead on this. The Netherlands in particular, they enforce basically a variation of the EU microbial count standards. These tests are simple. They're not real complex. They don't require $1 million lab or anything. It's basically the culture plates that we saw in high school biology class. It's the ability to interpret those plates that will provide the level of information to us that allows us to ensure patients that these medicines are clean and are within a potency range that's accepted by patients.
Great. Thank you very much. And finally, I just want to say this is a work in progress, all of this. As we move forward, there are certain areas of this that we need to address and get in conformity with what we think is probably the best practice. And this is one area dealing with the medical professional board to make sure we have legitimate doctors giving prescriptions here. There's so many other areas that are not going to be covered by this ordinance, but it is a step in the right direction.
Just one last question. What are cannabinoids?
Oh, what are cannabinoids? Cannabinoids are the active. They're a molecule that is the drug component of cannabis. The most famous one is THC. If you look around this room, you may see a T-shirt with it on it. THC is tetrahydrocannabinol, and it's the active drug component in cannabis, along with a few other minor cannabinoids.
Okay, we're learning too much now. Okay, thank you very much.
And by the way, you've just earned 3 continuing education credits. So.
Thank you very much. All right. Okay, so this gets us to the portion where we start our committee instructions relative to the direction that this draft ordinance will take. As you know, we're working with several departments, and more departments will probably be joining us in this effort. We've been strengthening the planning to bring back the radius city-wide map for 501,000 feet from sensitive uses and certain zones. So that gives the geography of what are the impacts. We instruct planning to initiate proceedings on the land use and zoning aspects of this ordinance. We instruct the CIA, the Chief Legislative Analyst's Office, in collaboration with City Attorney and City Departments to review the alternative draft ordinance and provide comments and recommendations to plan with regards to strengthening enforcement and protection of neighborhoods. And this should be including the police commission. Madam Attorney, can we do that? Include the police commission? Okay, then we will also include the police commission in this effort. Instruct the CAO and relevant departments to develop a fee study with regards to administration, implementation, enforcement of this new direction of this draft ordinance. And any other comments or directives? Councilman? Okay. So this is a work in progress. We want to move this as quick as possible. I'm hoping we get it done very, very soon. And we hope to be moving in the direction where we get results. So again, I thank you. That will be the directive and the action.
Coming back when?
Mr. Bell, for status on these directives, to give us some time to get some traction, we need to get the departments together, together with the CLA. Mr. Dow?
30 days?
Okay. Yeah, so we figured the new city attorney should be in office in 2 weeks, and we should give him 2 weeks to kind of warm his feet. So let's say 30 days for the first update.
Yeah, we can.
Just give us a status.
We can do a status, and certainly it has been. It's helpful that all this work has gone on to date under the leadership of the chief legislative analyst, so we can build upon that work.
Right.
We certainly don't want to reinvent anything that has already been done, so we want to build upon the work that has already gone on.
Okay.
We'll work as quickly as possible to get this ordinance and to do the required mapping analysis.
So the 30 days will give us a status of how far we progressed.
Right.
And if people want to give input, who can they contact to give input on the draft ordinance?
Certainly, I think that we will be working with the neighborhood councils on providing input.
Well, who will be the contact person?
They can contact me. My email address is
Well, let's have the CLA be the contact person, just to keep it focused.
That's fine.
So they can send their comments.
The CLA person.
Mr. Dow?
Is he here? He's still here?
He was here. Okay, he's not here. So we'll send it to Mr. Dow in the CLA's office.
Okay.
And that will be our
okay.
We confirm information to him.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Okay, so that's actually this committee. That takes care of item number 2. Roberto, let's go to the next item.
That will be the appeal on item 4, Councilman. It's an appeal by Martin Lipkin. He's appealing the action of the zoning administrator, which approved a conditional use for the sale and dispensing of beer and wine.
Which item is this?
Item 4, Councilman. And it's for the sale of beer and wine in conjunction with a existing mini market in CD3.
Okay, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, council members. This conditional use was approved by the zoning administrator to permit beer and wine sales for off-site consumption in conjunction with a mini mart operation at an existing gas station located at the southeast corner of Fallbrook and Victory. My name is Larry Friedman, Office of Zoning Administration, for the record. The site is catty corner to the Fallbrook Mall. It is Zone C2 and surrounded by other C2 zone properties. The requested and approved hours for beer and wine sales are from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. daily, the same as the operating hours of the mini mart and gas station. The conditional use approval is for an initial term grant of 5 years and includes a plan approval condition for compliance review to be filed between 12 and 18 months from the effective date. The council asserted jurisdiction on this case after the South Valley Area Planning Commission on May 14th, with 3 members present, and by 2-to-1 vote failed to act on an aggrieved party appeal. The appeal basically argues that there is a proliferation, or at least a potential proliferation, of gas stations that provide alcoholic beverage sales, which cause a detriment to public safety and not a public convenience. The appeal states that within 1 block of the site, there's an Albertsons, a CVS drugstore, a Ralph's supermarket, a Walmart, and a Trader Joe's that all provide alcoholic beverage sales for off-site consumption. The argument is that the area is already oversaturated with alcoholic beverage outlets. The Los Angeles Police Department did provide brief written comments about this case. West Valley Vice had no opposition to the application. And here behind me is, to my left, is Officer Ehrlich from Topanga Vice. The council office expressed opposition, stating that alcohol sales are not a complementary use to gas stations and that such combination runs against the social mores and laws that prohibit drinking while driving. Statistics show that the site is located in an area of relatively low crime compared to the citywide average crime rate. In the applicable census tract, there are currently no on-site or off-site licenses for alcohol. However, within 1,000 feet of the site, there are 3 active off-sale licenses. At the Area Planning Commission hearing last month, there was discussion about the subject property being located at the boundary of the applicable census tract. The census tract immediately adjacent to this one is allocated 3 on-site and 2 off-site licenses by Alcoholic Beverage Control. There are currently 8 on-sale licenses and 4 off-sale licenses within that adjacent census tract. Sensitive uses, such as schools, parks, churches, or hospitals within 1,000 feet of the site, include 2 private schools located on Oxnard Street. That's according to public hearing testimony, but not verified. The closest residential property is a single-family dwelling located approximately 180 feet southeast of the site and not adjoining it. The argument that alcohol sales are not a complementary use to gas stations and that such sales promote drinking while driving might be an assumed policy, but not an explicit one that specifically prohibits alcohol sales. The zoning code provides that conditional use permits for alcohol sales may be considered in commercial and industrial zones, subject to certain findings and criteria. The code does not make a blanket exclusion of specific uses, such as gas stations, from consideration of alcoholic beverage sales. In granting approval for this case, the daily operating hours from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. are in compliance with the commercial corner development regulations. Given the relatively low crime rate and the lack of LAPD opposition to the proposal, there was found to be no undue concentration of alcoholic beverage sales activity at this general location. That concludes my presentation if you have questions.
Okay, thank you. Now, I know the council office has submitted a card, but I was going to hear from the appellant first. You fine with that? Okay. So who is here representing the appellant? I believe the appeal was filed by Martin Lipkin and Daniel Schur representing. Like to come on up? Are you the appellants?
There's several members from the community that are here.
Okay. Well, there's no one here representing the appellants then. I'm sorry?
Patton is here, representing the Woodland Hills Homeowners Organization, Neighborhood Council.
No, I understand that. I'm just trying to be very clear here. I usually try to give the person or entity that's appealing the reason for their appeal. And that's what I'm asking if there's anyone here. If there isn't, then I'll just go through the cards. So we do have with us King R. Woods.
Councilman Reyes, Councilman Weezer, thank you very much. King Woods, my address is 660 North Diamond Bar Boulevard, Suite 204, Diamond Bar, California. I just want to add a few things to what Mr. Friedman said. This project is located in a census tract where the state of California allows 3 off-site licenses and no licenses exist. It's also in an area that has been classified by the police department as a low crime area. And as Mr. Friedman stated, we have a letter from the police department indicating that they are not opposed to the issuance of a CUB at this location. And I think the applicant has met all of the requirements for a conditional use permit. He has a wonderful record. He has had no problems at his location, and this is probably one of the cleanest cases that I've worked on. If there's a policy in certain areas of the city not to grant CUBs for these type cases, I think we all should know about that, and then this applicant would not have filed an application. Those are my comments. I certainly will be willing to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Woods. Any questions?
Thank you very much.
No, okay. Jim Anderson. Then Gordon Morley, then Pat Patton.
Good evening. I'm Jim Anderson. I'm chair of the Public Safety Committee with the Woodland Hills Neighborhood Council. As you're sitting here today as appellant judges, in a sense, I'm asking you to consider that our common law, which still exists in parts of the country, was based and included the concept of a reasonable man. So I'm asking that you view our statements in that sense. It is not reasonable for another liquor license in this area. I live, work, walk, and cycle in the area. There is an elementary school, Hamlin Elementary School, within 1,000 feet. What is the position of the city council when the neighborhood councils, and I'm elected, the same as you are, gentlemen, when we come to you, we have to pay to file an appeal. Mr. Lipkin is a member of our council in good standing, and ask that you hear what the council long time ago said. We do not think that this is an adequate place for a license.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Gordon Murley. I'm here speaking as a resident of Woodland Hills today, but I feel that you really need to honor the councilman's request. There have been 10 others that have been turned down. There are 4 other service stations within 2 blocks of this particular establishment that would like to have liquor licenses also. I don't know how you would be able to grant this one and not have the others come back and say, if he can have it, I have the same privilege, simply because you have a line running down the middle of Fallbrook doesn't take away the concentration. If you want to try and compartmentalize the city, it would create problems for everybody in their districts, because if you can walk across the street and get whatever you want, there is an over-concentration, just because it happens to sit in what somehow the ABC made a residential census tract. Just doesn't really make sense for you. Thank you.
Mr. Martin. Pat Patton, Herb Madsen.
My name is Pat Patton. I was present and a member of the Woodland Hills Homeowners Organization, an officer in that organization. This was brought before us, and we denied the request for a liquor license off sale. It was also went to the neighborhood council, their plum committee, and it was viewed, and it was requested to deny. It was then presented to our general board of 21 members and a full audience that it be denied, and it was so granted. As far as not being close to a residence, it's a half a block for a concentration of co-op homes and apartments. So there is residence. If those people, because they're renters or such, are not considered residential, that's something else again. We feel that also the thing that helped us make our decision was that the license goes with the land and it will become a liquor store.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker.
Good evening, Herb Matson, 22661 Oxnard Street. I'm a member of the Walnut Acres Neighborhood Association, Woodland Hills Homeowners, and also am an elected member of the Neighborhood Council. I serve on the Plum Committee. The Plum Committee, which has 8 members, denied this thing unanimously. It came in front of the Neighborhood Council. It was denied unanimously, 21-0. It went back to the Plum Committee because of some error supposedly in the paperwork or the agenda. It was again denied 8-0, and when it came back to the council for the second time, it was denied again unanimously. There is no reason to think that this service station should have liquor, because right across the street there are at least 8, and probably more than that, because they have established a larger Fallbrook Center. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Matson. Okay, Mr. Brand.
Chairman Reyes, Councilman Weezar, my name is Jonathan Brand. I'm the council deputy for Councilman Dennis Zine. Councilman Zine has asserted jurisdiction on this matter because he believes that there is no need for beer and wine to be permitted at this location. While this census tract does not have off-site licenses, it directly abuts a neighboring tract that is home to both the Pride Center and Fallbrook Mall shopping centers. Right across the street from the subject site, these centers provide an adequate concentration of off-site alcohol sales. There is a CVS pharmacy, an Albertsons, a Ralph's, a Trader Joe's, and a Walmart at these shopping centers, all of which have off-site alcohol. When thinking about the community as a whole, it is silly not to take these adjacent locations into consideration. Moreover, an off-site application at this very location, 6350 Fallbrook, was denied in 1989, with the zoning administrator mentioning in the determination letter that and I quote, an undue concentration of establishments that serve or sell alcoholic beverages already exists in the area, and continuing proliferation can only reduce the desirability of the area as a place to live and work. You know, not much really has changed in this neighborhood over the last 20 years, and we feel that the findings made for the previous denial are still relevant and accurate. In addition, another application for beer and wine at a gas station just a few doors down in the past was denied as well. Lastly, as a former traffic enforcement supervisor for LAPD, Councilman Zine is generally not in favor for the co-location of gas and alcohol, but does look at every application on a case-by-case basis. Thank you.
So at this time, the recommendation would be to grant the appeal filed by Martin Lipkin and never overturn the entire determination of the administrator, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. Councilman, any comments? Okay, so we will support the council office in the request to grant the appeal filed by Martin Lipkin and thereby overturn the entire determination. The zoning permit approving a conditional use permit for the sale and dispense of beer and wine for off-site consumption in conjunction with an existing 127 square foot liquor market located at a gasoline service station 6350 for Fallbrook Avenue.
Councilman Jerry Bridge, City Attorney's Office, if you could also direct staff to prepare findings in support of that decision.
And if the public can support, it's right here.
Okay, just for clarification, Councilmember, and I hope the city attorney can help me with this. On the agenda, I think the appropriate action would be to grant the appeal and to deny the conditional use. Is that what you said? I just want to make sure.
That's fine. He said and overturn the zoning administrator, but yes, and also deny the conditional use permit. That's fine.
All right, thank you.
Okay. All right. So the planning department come up with new findings that need to be prepared. Okay. That takes care of that item. Roberto, what's next?
It's item 9 and 10, and those are hardship exemptions from the medical marijuana ICO. The number 9, the hardship exemption has been filed by Anthony Folsom.
Okay. So item number 9.
It's a hardship exemption request.
All right. Can we ask the applicant to come forward and state the nature of your appeal?
Good afternoon. My name is Thomas J. Gray. I'm an attorney, and my practice is on Wilshire Boulevard here in Los Angeles in the Koreatown area.
Yeah.
And I'm here to address the hardship application of the Bulldog Dispensary. Before I get started, I wanted to make a few comments. I also am working with a group. It is a basically a trade organization, if you will, that has just recently formed, the Compassionate Association of Cannabis Providers. They're here in Los Angeles. They have limited their membership to the 187 collectives or cooperatives that are presently
I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you just to pause for a second. Can you give us your name and address, because I want to make sure your speaker card has been filled out.
Sure. It's Thomas J. Gray, G-R-A-Y.
And you filled it out?
I'm not sure. I arrived here late, so...
He didn't fill one out. He was representing.
That's okay, I just wanted to fill it out to make sure we're all consistent on the record.
I'll be happy to do that for you.
Okay. Just want to make sure we're...
Just a moment, please. Here. I'm representing, in addition to the Bulldog Cafe Collective, I also represent Hezekiah, which is a nonprofit dispensary. They've been in operation for a number of years, I believe since 2005 or thereabouts. I want to thank you for your time here, for your devotion to this issue. And before I get to the Bulldog, I want to speak just briefly about what the people who are running these collectives, who have put these collectives together, and who are now putting together their trade organization, which we'll call CACP.
But I'm hoping you focus on the subject site.
Okay, the subject site, I can easily do that. I thought that it would be important to stress that the members of this organization, which includes the Bulldog Collective, are in favor of regulation, and they want to work with you. That's something that I think is key. As far as the subject site goes, they opened originally in 2006, I believe it was. Yes. And they are a pre-ICO collective. What happened was that the DEA sent letters to the landlord, and basically the landlord then forced them out of their original location, even though they had a lease. Interestingly enough, that same landlord, after they forced out Bulldog, turned around and leased that same space to a non-licensed medical marijuana dispensary. You'll be taking that up, I assume, at some future point. The thing that's important here is that Bulldog was licensed, and they were pre-ICO. They were forced out. They had two choices, and this, I think, is the classic hardship case. Either go out of business or find another location, keep their permits current, and do everything that they could to stay within all of the aspects of the law. And that is, in fact, what they have done. They have their permits from 2008. They have their permits from 2009. They have kept their permits. They signed a new lease in January of 2009, and they opened their doors in March. Their original location was on Cahuenga Boulevard in North Hollywood. They're now located on Melrose. They have an excellent history. They have done a number of things which the members of the trade organization advocate doing: security systems, armed guard patrolling the area, making sure that there are no illegal out the back door types of sales. In other words, they're doing everything that they can to live within both the spirit and the letter of the laws as they exist.
Okay, I need you to start to conclude, please, because you have quite a few speaker cards.
The bottom line, pardon me, the bottom line is that if there are going to be any hardship applications granted, Bulldog should receive one. And the reason for that is that they have stayed within the law. They've done everything that they could. The only reason that they've moved is because they were forced to. They are a pre-ICO organization, and they should be permitted to stay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
When you say they're pre-ICO, it was my understanding that if you're pre-ICO, you wouldn't need a hardship exemption.
Well, the problem is...
qualify as one of the 187 or so that
The problem is that all of this is, as I see it, as an attorney, unclear at this point, because you guys are really trying to hash things out. The bottom line is that they're not in the same location, so under some interpretations, they would need the hardship exemption. They were forced to move. They had a landlord who said, "You're out of here," even though they had a lease. And like I said, that landlord then turned around and rented to another collective, which is not licensed and isn't pre-ICO.
Okay.
But in this particular situation, if you're going to grant any hardship exemptions at all, I think that this is the situation that calls for it. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our next group of speakers, and we'll keep this again to 1 minute. We have Michael D. Healy and Reverend Patrick Duff.
Councilman Reyes, Councilman Weezar. My name is Michael D. Healy. I live in West Los Angeles. I'm here as a representative of the Compassionate Association of Cannabis Providers. We're a trade association comprised of many of the 187 registered collectives under the city's current medical marijuana interim control ordinance. The association's position is that the Plum Committee's primary objective through this hardship process should be to determine which requests come from legitimate registered applicants and which come from operations that began after the ICO deadline. We ask that you please ensure that these hardship hearings on any of the original registered dispensaries be fair and objective. The Compassionate Association of Cannabis Providers does not support nor represent any of the 600 plus collectives that have taken advantage of our city, our neighborhoods, and the patients. The 187 registered collectives will be relieved when this committee has fairly separated legitimate from illegitimate hardship requests and moves forward with permanent regulations. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Patrick Duff. We have, I believe the last name is Canty. I'm trying to make out the letters as D-E-G-E, I believe. I am so sorry. I will eventually learn.
It's okay.
Matthew Shulman, and then Virgil Grant.
Good afternoon, council members. Dejay Kuti, District 4. I'm president of the Patient Advocacy Network, member of the Medical Marijuana Working Group, and a Public Safety Committee volunteer for the Central Hollywood Neighborhood Council. Here we are finally having our first hardship hearings, so thank you. Nearly 2 years ago, I spoke before this body about the moratorium, and at that time, while I acknowledged a need for a moratorium, the main purpose that I was here that day was to remind you that our collectives and their landlords were under an unprecedented attack by the DEA. No other business in the history of Los Angeles has had to suffer this type of attack, let alone have to deal with it under a moratorium. At least 57 of the registered collectives have filed a hardship based on this DEA landlord threat. In our working group meetings, this matter was discussed, and the hardship was told that that was the remedy for this DEA landlord threat letter when a collective had to move.
I think it's important that you focus on this site, on this location.
Never was it stated or explained that a registered dispensary could not operate while it was waiting for a hardship hearing. I just ask you to be fair and objective with our dispensaries. We don't need to lose our good ones.
Thank you very much. Matthew Shulman, Virgil Grant, I believe, and then Darren Straff.
Good afternoon. As a patient, I'm here to stress the importance of Bulldog Collective. It is a very safe environment which offers security for me to go in and get clean, affordable medication in a safe environment. I cannot stress the safety of this. When going to places like these, it is clear that there are some consequences that could come out when leaving a store with medication, but for Bulldog, for me, it's nothing but safety, and I've never had anything but a clean, safe access from them, and it's a great thing in that location. I really support it. Thank you.
Thank you. This closes public hearing. We have Virgil Grant, Darren Straff, and this is the last speaker, Matthew Healy, and then we'll hear from Renee Whitesell from the council member's office. Virgil Grant, are you here? Darren Straff and Matthew, I believe it's Healy.
I think both of them stepped out.
They both stepped out.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, we got to keep moving.
I'm Matthew Healy.
Matthew, come on down. Please, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm one of the owners of Cahuenga Caregivers Bulldog Cafe Collective. I just wanted to thank you, Mr. Reyes and Mr. Weezar, for seeing us and getting through this process of the hardship hearings. We are a pre-ICO collective, and we have applied for a hardship because we were forced out of our prior location in Northern Hollywood. This we submit to the committee is not a form for the conditional use process, but rather, with over 600 non-licensed collectives in Los Angeles, this council should focus on which hardships the exemption was intended for, and furthermore, who conversely took advantage of the hardship exemptions. We respectfully ask the Plum Committee to grant pre-ICO collectives with hardships if any hardships are to be granted. Bulldog Cafe Collective had received no complaints with respect to behavioral issues, such as loitering, graffiti, or illegal dispersion of medication. Our goal is to affect the community positively. As for any other complaints we have received, they have been simply because we are an MMJ collective. We asked when attending the neighborhood council meetings, we asked them why they didn't want us in our current location, and simply they told us that we don't have anything against you, and we have nothing against saying that you violated any laws with respect to your behavior, but simply that you're a MMJ co-op.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Also just wanted to add that we've had some, we are farther away from, there's a preschool which is on Cahuenga, which is 1,500 feet from our collective, which goes 500 feet further than the 1,000 feet per the AG guideline stipulations.
Thank you, sir. Are there two individuals that we... Okay, did you fill out a card? Come on up, sir. Can we give the gentleman a card, please?
Thank you. I'll make sure and fill this out. My name's Anthony Folsom. Okay, my family has a long and treasured history of serving this state. In addition to that, I went into this business not because I am a drug dealer. First of all, I'll be very personal with you. My mother died of brain cancer. In addition to that, my uncle died of Parkinson's disease. I, myself, was run over by a car while trying to cross a crosswalk, and I'm lucky to be alive. So I know the value of medical marijuana to myself and what it did for my mother from a whole different generation, and for my uncle who was far older than she. The fact of the matter is that medical marijuana is needed. We are not a criminal organization. We seek to do everything we can to help and benefit the community. We also have corporate contracts with cancer centers that we work with. So when making this decision, we would like that taken into account. We only moved after a DEA letter. We waited well over a year. We signed our lease on January 1 of this year, prior to even the library becoming an issue. Please consider those things. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, sir. Okay, now, I guess our last two speakers are not here, General Straff and Virgil Grant, so that's the last call for them. And Renee Wetzer.
Thank you very much, Councilman Reyes and Councilman Huizar. Renee Weitzer, representing Councilman Tom LaBonge. Unfortunately, we cannot support this hardship at this location. This applicant did not follow the rules. He opened his dispensary after the interim control ordinance. The ordinance clearly states that you cannot move from one location to another after the ICO. The dispensary is just about 3 or 4 doors away from Fremont Public Library that's been there for years. And we don't believe that this site is a good site. It's a sensitive use, and we very much oppose the hardship. Thank you very much.
Let me ask you, Ms. Wetzer.
Yes.
Are there other establishments of this type in that corridor or in that area?
Yes, there are. There are about 6. However, they're in Councilman Garcetti's district. Just outside of our district.
How far away is that?
I can't really, just a couple blocks maybe.
Okay. So there's okay. Any questions, Councilman?
I just want to ask the city attorney, what's our standard for either granting or denying a hardship exemption?
Jerry Bridge, City. The ordinance says it's a legislative act subject to your decision, to your satisfaction. And a legislative act requires a rational basis. So that gives you quite a bit of leeway. You need a basis, you need to articulate a basis, it needs to be rational. That's the standard.
And that standard is pretty it's a low standard to meet.
Yes, because it's a legislative act, and that does tend to be a lower standard for a city.
Okay, so given the evidence and circumstances before us, I think what I think the facts before us, as stated by the council office, is sufficient to deny the application as expressed by the council office, correct?
We could certainly defend that denial. Just to make it clear, a land use ordinance always runs with the land. So when somebody says they've moved, that is not traditionally going to give them any protection under a land use ordinance, because you're protecting the land, not the applicant. And the non-conforming rights of anyone would run with the land, not the applicant, because as a land use ordinance, you're going to look at the actual use and what has happened around the use, the compatibility of the use, etc. And once that use moves, all of those factors that led you to allow a use will change. So just to make that clear about why the ordinance is written the way it is, because the use runs with the land, not the person.
Great, thank you.
So given the presence of the library and the impacts there, it's, I'm sorry, there's no more discussion. This hearing is over. That the applicant has not demonstrated any hardship from the provision of ordinance number 179027. Therefore, the hardship exemption application should be denied. That will action this committee. Next item, Robertson.
The next item, Councilman, is again a hardship exemption request by Stuart Ricklin. He's the attorney representing the applicant, and this is for New Age Wellness Group in CD 11.
How do you do? Stuart Richland again. I'm a resident of Hollywood, and my law office is also in Hollywood on Cahuenga. My client, Mr. Moore, come on up. Why don't you come on up and stand with me, partner? I would like to point out some important facts about this particular hardship. To start off with, Mr. Moore is a physical therapist since 1980, and his partner is a hospital administrator licensed by the federal and state government. The two gentlemen chose to open up a collective, and they obtained a license and permit in Tujunga in May of 2007. This was before there was an ICO rule whatsoever. They disclosed to the city licensing individual that they were opening up a medical marijuana center pursuant to state law. The collective was pressured by the rules that came down from Chief Bratton. You'll recall that Police Chief Bratton came down with a draft set of rules that was very, very detailed, and yet it contained a lot of provisions that you have not adopted. It was very, very difficult to qualify under those rules. My clients chose, notwithstanding their legal rights, not to fight, because they found that they were located by some sensitive uses in Tujunga where they were licensed. So the collective, although it disclosed its use was medical marijuana, got no notice from the City of Los Angeles about the ICO or its filing deadline. They proceeded to obtain a location after meeting with Daisy Moe in planning twice. They also met with another councilman, Rosenthal's office, once. The collective researched the law, and after having met with Daisy Moe, they hired me to file their hardship in January 2009. I attached to the hardship copies of their license, which predated the moratorium. The license is dated 5/11/07. Based on Ms. Moe's communications and their understanding of the state of the law as it's been put down, they've expended approximately $100,000, first building out the first location, then relocating and building out the new space, and they have paid that money both in build-out and in rent in the two locations. They have just finally gotten ready to open, and they are not open, and they have not violated the hardship provisions one iota. If there is truly a hardship that should be granted, it is someone who has filed, consulted with council, consulted with planning, obtained information about how they should relocate, hired legal counsel who researched the matter, filed the hardship, and presented it way back in January. Now, all of these months later, they've been building out security, a safe, fireproof glass. They are not located close to any uses that are sensitive, and they are highly qualified individuals with every intent to follow the Attorney General's guidelines perfectly. Having found their location on Rose, they're just the internal members of the collective that are the patients. There are 5 patients in the center. They intend to open up so that they can take care of patients with serious and chronic conditions with the same techniques that they've used as hospital administrator and physical therapist. They have a nonprofit corporation. They were licensed and permitted in Tahunga, and now we'd like to please have their hardship granted so they can take care of patients. And I know my client would like to address you as well.
Yes, good afternoon, sir.
I just wanted to give you a little background. I've been a caregiver since 1982 as a physical therapist. I specialize in geriatric care. I also have a corporation that provides physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy. We took all the recommendations very seriously. We realized once we started at the original location that we were located next to a park, and there was a church across the street. Realizing that we were out of compliance as far as the recommendations went, it took us approximately a year and a half to find a location that was suitable and in compliance in every way. We have parking. We're over 1,000 square feet from any school, church, anything dedicated to the sole use of children. We have the same level of security as a bank like Wells Fargo with a bulletproof glass. We have the 16-camera electronic surveillance with a 90-day DVR. We have the programmable safe as in the recommendations. We're only going to be open from 10 to 8 o'clock at night, and we're providing security. It's a safe, clean environment in a medical setting. We don't have an ATM, or we are not going to put one in. We have a merchant account, and ideally we'd like to deal less in cash and more with merchant accounts or debit cards. My partner, who can be here today, is a hospital administrator with a federal and a state license, and I have a professional corporation. We have a lot at stake to lose, so we plan on partnering up with the community in the city of Los Angeles and being here for a long time.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
We hope you'll grant us our hardship.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Okay.
We have I believe it's Yolanda. I'll try to spell it out. I think it's JONNASTR at 574 South Venice Boulevard. You still here?
Is she for or against?
Well,
She's gone.
The Yolanda at 574 South Venice Boulevard. You're still here? Okay. Rana Janasi at 12923 Chandler Boulevard. Like to come on up? Yes. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Yana Genesee, and I'm a primary caregiver for Wellness Caregivers, which is prior to the ICOs, I had formed the corporation. I was a legitimate patient. I get my medical recommendation across the street from St. Joseph Hospital. I delivered my baby 23 and a half weeks. I was giving my legitimate recommendation across the street from Joseph. And I opened up at 2 locations because prior to that I was serving in Cedars-Sinai as a administrator of outpatient surgery center for a cancer patient, which is I can bring all of my doctors on a board. And I set up my 2 beautiful facilities with all of the medical requirements as being state-of-art, and back in 2007. I consult with our lobbying association, was the greatest people of all in the movement, and I built Taj Mahals that everybody knew and was laughing about me in 2 different locations under the same corporation. 3 months after it, I get the letter, 1 page, 2 pages, sorry, 1.5 page for the same guy, don't want to mention his name, screw you with your facility, with your medical record, with St. Joseph, with your 1 pound, 5 ounces baby, your 6 months in the hospital. Get the heck out of here, and your $600,000 any construction, first mortgage loan, second mortgage loan, get the heck out of it. They put a lawsuit in the one location with an existing lease, lawsuit in another location, addressing the issue ICO, 2 location. I had to close it. Not knowing what's going to be another thing, hardship and everything, I went and I opened up. I didn't have much money anymore, sir. You know, I'm just a little girl trying to work my way and building out of the industry, out of something that wasn't existing before. So I don't have notes in front of me. I just talk from my heart. I have one location right now. I went to the city. I did it all by myself. No consultants, no great lawyers, no nobody. So if you're planning to close everybody who did that and followed, we followed your requirements and get an ICO us 187. Now, if you're planning to treat us as everybody else, I mean, after 187 and after ICO codes passed, that is unconstitutional, and it's going to be a lot of problems, I think. But thank you for a minute of giving me a chance to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we do have with us Whitney Blumenfeld from Councilmember Rosendale's district. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, council members. Whitney Blumenfeld from Councilmember Bill Rosendale's office. I have submitted a letter for both of your reviews. The council member, although a strong advocate for a patient's right to access to medical marijuana, does not support this exemption for an application. He is concerned with the proliferation of facilities in Venice. It is also 5 blocks away from another one and within 1,000 feet from a park, and our office has received complaints with this location. Thank you.
So its proximity to the park is a major factor?
Correct.
In his decision?
Correct.
As well as proximity to others that are already established?
Correct, and I think one of the major concerns has been the complaints that the office has received from the
Can you
location.
speak to the complaints in general?
Sure. The reports that have been received have been constituents who have told staff that they've seen a large number of customers of this facility rolling and smoking marijuana cigarettes around the neighborhood and selling prescriptions to others.
So there's a direct connection of those that are standing outside with this facility based on the witnesses and statements made by constituents who come to the office.
Correct.
Okay. I'm sorry, this is not a debate, sir. I'm sorry. Okay. This is not a discussion, sir.
So if they're not open.
Rose Avenue, 609 Rose Avenue, but we need the names of the witnesses who've stated that someone smoked. There's no way
Are
this
they not
place is
open?
not open. I'd like to challenge that. That's hearsay. Hearsay within hearsay.
Okay.
Challenge it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If I'm let me make for a second.
No.
They're
Madam Attorney, are we okay?
He said don't confuse them with the facts.
Jerry Birch, City Attorney's Office. This is something that will still go to council, and there's still an opportunity for the council office to do more research before this goes to council.
Okay. So we'll hold this. Should we hold this or should we move it on to council?
That might even be better to continue this for, maybe ask the council office how long they may need to look into this more, a week, 1 week, 2 weeks?
Next week is sufficient.
Yeah. And perhaps you could show evidence that it's not open.
We will continue this for 1 week.
We'll show evidence. You want us back here 1 week, same time, 2 o'clock or 5 o'clock?
We're going to target 2 o'clock, and that'll be our goal, but sometimes council does go over.
Thank you very much.
Can I ask you a question, Mr. Richland?
Please.
How many of these dispensaries do you represent?
I represent well over 100 of them. I represented many of them before the ICO was filed. I participated in assisting them with their nonprofit incorporations. My background is I've worked for 3 different AV-rated law firms in Century City and Beverly Hills doing corporate. It happened that I was helping a man with a divorce when I got, he needed to have an order from a judge on how
How many did you say you represent? 100, how many?
Well over 100.
Well over 100.
And
How many of those applied for a hardship exemption?
At least 2 dozen, maybe 3 dozen.
2 or 3 dozen?
Some of them were relocating due to the DEA letters, which caused them to move, and some were new centers which opened up under a hardship. And the purpose for the filing of the hardships was completely consistent with what Daisy Moe stated, and consistent also with the motion that you all brought on April 28th, which is that there is a process that was prescribed for a center that wanted to open. Excuse me. There was a process that was prescribed for centers to open, and people come to me with legal problems of their patients and want to open. So I'll let them know, hey, you have to be a nonprofit. Here's the Attorney General's guidelines. Here are the rules. In order to buy, sell, transport, or cultivate cannabis, one must be part of a nonprofit collective, and that is state rights. So there's really nothing that this body can do to stop people from joining collectives, growing and transporting and distributing marijuana.
And
now,
I
what
think,
we
and
want
I
to
think,
do...
And I think that's where there's some misunderstanding here, because we have our regulations right now that set up a process to process these hardship exemptions. And I'd read your application that you submitted, but you're talking about the right to do this, which obviously we're trying to, we will comply, and we are complying with the state regulations, but it doesn't say why each one of your individual hardship exemptions is so unique that they need to be granted a hardship exemption. And I haven't seen that in any of your hardship exemptions that you've applied for.
Well, I look forward to being before you for every single one of them if that's the pleasure of this board. I mean, every time someone comes to me, I counsel with them. If they're a patient and they want to take care of other patients, they have a right to create a collective. And then they say to me, well, where can I open up a storefront? Well, the city of Los Angeles has these rules, the county has these rules, the independent cities have these rules, and anything that you need to do that's legal, I will help you do. And then it just comes down to what their choices have been. Now, I think that the important thing to consider is if we had a very small number of centers, there would be tremendous lines, and ultimately there would be a return to the black market, which no one wants. We don't want kids to get cannabis. We don't want it to be in the black market. We want it to be taxed. We don't want patients to be exposed to other drugs from some dealer. So what we want is to help us to create proper rules so that we can establish appropriate safe access in the city. I think that the golden number of 187 is an illusion, because I saw those people coming to me before the deadline, scrambling to find a location and open, just like people scrambled to open under the hardship. It doesn't mean that they're profiteers. Each center should be looked at individually. Are they a nonprofit? Are they following the rules? Do they only take care of patients that are adults and that have recommendations? If so, their transactions should be a very small priority for government, because it's a patient and their doctor's private relationship, and it's their illness, you know? And some people say, hey, this guy looked really young.
Thank you. You've answered my question.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Don't get me started. You know, I can't stop. Sorry. Thank you very much.
And if I could clarify, Councilman, Daisy Moe's name keeps being mentioned. I feel a need to defend any staff member, because I can assure you, working with Daisy Moe, that she is simply stating what the law says. The planning department has on their website frequently asked questions related to medical marijuana. One of those frequently asked questions is, can you operate a medical marijuana dispensary, if that's the word that is used, pending a hardship application? The answer is no. No, because it is not legal unless it has complied with the interim control ordinance, and it is not legal until a hardship exemption is granted. And that has always been the case in the city of Los Angeles with hardship exemptions.
Mr. Chair, you cannot address that. Thank you very much. This is not a debate. I asked you a question, and it's been answered. Thank you very much.
Can I give you just a follow-up?
Mr. Richmond, no. The ruling on this item is that it will be continued for a week. Do we have any other items on this from CLA?
This item 13, Councilman, which is the planning department's status report.
There is a public comment card, I believe. Don't forget
Right.
that.
Okay, so
We continued it for a week.
okay. All right, anybody here for public comment? Is there anything else about that? Was it, right?
Just item 13, I don't know if there's a status report or not.
I don't believe we have one, so anybody for public comment? We did get one card, that was a Theresa Marcus. That's the only card. You, sir, are you? Item 13?
So is that agenda?
No, this is for public comment.
For agenda, which one, number 9?
The public comment is on anything that's not on the agenda.
I'd like to address, I had a card up there, but I stepped to the restroom. Name is Virgil Grant.
Okay.
May I address?
Well, that item 13 is we've already dispensed with it, but you're welcome to speak on anything but the items on the agenda.
Okay, I wanted to address item number 9.
We can't, sir, because that's on the agenda.
Okay.
This is for anything that's not on the agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, seeing no one else, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.